So, do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself? A bit about your experience and what you get up to.
I'm Ben Barton. I'm head of research and development for the Ocean Over Group. Now, we're a group of effectively organisations focused on talent management in schools. That we know that 80% of schools' budgets are about people, so it makes sense for us to support schools to make the best out of their people, recruit them, train them, help them to lead really sort of fulfilling careers. So I've been doing this for the last sort of 7 years now. But prior to that, very quickly, I worked at various publishing companies. So I worked at Pearson and Heinemann early on in my career. Then I founded a business called Rising Stars, which was a primary textbook publisher. Did really quite well out of that, and sort of sold that in my bit of that in about 2000. And then I had sort of guilt because I'd never worked in schools. So I became a volunteer TA in Hackney and Notting Hill for 2 years, just really helping out on mathematics, just to really understand a little bit about what the fabric of the school was like and about what it's like to work in a school as opposed to just being somebody who engages with schools in terms of product development or sales. Massively illuminating, considerably harder than any work I've ever done before or since, but really kind of made me focus on what the people were absolutely essential. So after that, I built an EdTech business called Zondel, which was game-based learning, went massive in America, and then was really, really difficult to manage the customer service because I was needing to go to bed when everybody wanted to have their passwords changed and stuff like that. So that was kind of interesting. And then, like I say, for the last sort of 7 years, I've been working at Ocean Over, looking at solutions for schools in that really critical area around people. And we take a lot of our influence from sort of those large organizations in the East Coast of America. So Harvard Business School and Korn Ferry, and looking really at that sort of elements of the sort of the war for talent and how that really impacts on schools.
Oh, that's really interesting. So your work with schools at the moment, are you running particular apprenticeship programs or using particular apprenticeship standards to kind of help upskill and
we're
retain
looking
talent?
at the moment. We've got currently 3 apprenticeship standards we're really focusing on in the leadership and management space. What we know from schools is that there's about 1 million people employed in schools in England, and about 70,000 of those are operating at sort of some sort of fairly senior leadership level. But often those people get into even junior leadership levels just simply by being very good at being a history teacher or a maths teacher without any of that underpinning knowledge, which are those challenging things about dealing with people, dealing with finance, dealing with operations. So we've really focused on the level 3 team leader, the level 5 departmental manager and operations manager, and then our largest program, which is the senior leader apprenticeship.
Nice. That's really interesting because so I'm aware of like the senior leader standard, for example, at level 7, almost equivalent to like an MBA style program, and all of those programs, those leadership programs. I would have never thought that there's a direct application to schools and education, which is fantastic. So I imagine you obviously they're very tailored to the school environment, right? So you take the standard, which isn't education specific, is it? And then you make it education specific.
I mean, all of those standards are amazingly created. So they've been created by organisations like the NHS, BT, Virgin, Barclays, all of these large organisations, notably not anybody from the Department for Education. And so what we've had to do is take those standards, which are great management standards at all 3 levels, and then really try and contextualise them for those challenges of working in a school. So, for example, working in a school, you've only got really one side of the budget that you need to focus on. You get a certain amount of money from the government every year, and you have to manage that. You're now getting 3-year settlements, so you have to manage that side of things. So there's quite a lot of work around that side of things. Also, the fact that you are dealing with a unionized workforce, though latterly not so unionized, and how you manage the sort of the challenges of dealing with terms and conditions that are set in stone, and that whole recruitment piece. But also increasingly the challenges that schools face are operational challenges about how they scale, particularly within a multi-academy trust or even a local authority. How do they deliver building projects, deliver computing projects, etc. So it's a lot about those traditional leadership and management sort of, I suppose, standards that we're really focused on.
Yeah, that is interesting. So there's like so many questions that are now springing to my mind, but I won't have time to ask them, I'm sure. Yeah, but I think tailoring it to context is what apprenticeships is all about, right? So that's really good to hear. Do you, out of interest, and this might be a little bit too much of a granular question, but I'm always curious about the kind of learning design as a sort of educator and kind of keen on, learning experiences and focusing on like collaborative learning and things like that. How do you structure like the overall journey? Do you, just from a practical point of view, do you have modules, or is there kind of contact time in short bursts, or is it kind of day release? So I know there are so many different ways that apprenticeships can be run.
And clearly,
right?
We've been through this sort of whole COVID sort of situation, which has made us move away. Look, we are absolutely all about face-to-face. We are all about being in the same room together. I mean, somebody who you must get on this podcast is Nick Hurd, who's our Chief Learning Officer, who is all about creating moments within these organisations, nice. Within these programs. So we're very much about live delivery, but we've now, having gone through the pandemic where we had to move online, we now have sort of this hybrid model where we have day one, lots of online learning, lectures from people from education, but also from the wider sort of economy, and then coming together locally in local areas, and that's something about our pod system that I can talk about later, is bringing together local groups of people who come from similar sorts of schools, similar backgrounds, to unpack a lot of the work that they've heard of on day one, and actually then to really ferociously contextualize that to their school or their multi-academy trust. So that's very much been that sort of learning design. We are still offering, though it's as an extension pathway for the senior leadership program, an MSc in education, leadership and management. So we're moving people towards that. So a little bit more of the academic elements of that. And so therefore we have input from our university partner, University of Roehampton, to make sure that when those people transition across to effectively the MSc, they're ready to do that as well. So there's quite a lot of moving parts within that sort of learning design.
Yeah, no, it's really interesting. A question I had prepared earlier was, what are some of the biggest misconceptions about apprenticeships that you find? Because I think part of what we do when we're in the apprenticeship space, we feel we know how amazing they are and can be, and there's still a lot of work to be done to try and normalize them, or even beyond normalize them, make them such the appealing offering that they are, particularly maybe for school leavers or beyond. But what are some of the biggest misconceptions you think still abound today?
A lot of it, I'm afraid, is about the status of apprenticeships within the firmament of what you can do in terms of post-school education. I mean, I've said this, didn't go down that well when I was at an event at the Department for Education, saying that all sort of destinations are not created equal. We start in this country with Oxford and Cambridge, and then we move to the Russell Group universities, then we move to the rest of universities, then we kind of move to having a job, then we get to apprenticeships, and then it's neat. And having an apprenticeship, and having spent 5 years looking at apprenticeship standards across the piece, and we're about to launch some degree apprenticeships in 2023. So looking really, the level of, I believe, research and evidence that have gone into these apprenticeship programs, particularly degree apprenticeships and post-degree apprenticeships, are absolutely exceptional. And I think what we're finding is the outcomes of those are incredible for young people, and also for people who are existing staff and sort of closer to my age. So I think they're absolutely phenomenal. So that's one misconception, is the fact that they are seen as lower quality for lower ability. That the lowerness of it is something that I think we absolutely need to reverse. And I just because of the work I do looking at talent generally, this country does not need university talent right now. It needs working talent who are going to crack on and do that work. And that is also, social mobility is not going to be driven by taking a 60 grand debt on. Social mobility is going to be about working and effectively learning while you work. Here's a weird one. I'm 53. I'm an apprentice. I'm doing the senior leader apprenticeship right now. And I'm learning stuff on a daily basis. I'm reading this incredible book from Margaret Heffernan called Uncharted at the moment. So it's about that just shifting us as a country, I think, because it is very, it's very country based. That's it. And thinking very differently about how we do that. And then other misconceptions are about things like off-the-job training. That's slightly more prosaic. But I think, for me, I wrote a white paper in 2017, which I've updated, I think, 8 times now with changes. It's been downloaded over 2,500 times over that period of time. And it's really about just getting that simple message across. Very high quality learning, going to help you in your job and help you to move on in your job. And that's the thing we're most proud of at the NC is helping people to move on in their job. And going to help you solve the challenges that you face day by day in the jobs that you're doing. So that is for me. That is always the misconception, is how the status of apprenticeships.
Yeah, fantastic. I think I would agree with that as well. I think my background in apprenticeships last 4.5 years, sort of working on the digital side. I mean, coming back to the point about learning design and delivery, it's got to be contextualized, right? And COVID was a great catalyst for many forward-thinking organizations that wanted to could accelerate through with their online provision where it was appropriate. On our side, digital, a lot of the learners, because they're working on software and things like that, a lot of them have become permanently home workers anyway. They're used to remotely working. Some have moved hundreds of miles away from their workplace because it's now remote work. Some are even out of the country, like temporarily. And so that's become our reality. But then in other contexts, like, school teachers and even things like healthcare, you need that face to face, because that's where it all happens. And also on the topic of degree apprenticeships in general, but degree apprenticeships, even senior leader apprenticeships, which is a master's, it's like an MBA or an MSc, and it's kind of maybe it's the wrong word, but it's an elite education, but you're kind of getting it paid for. And I see the degrees, when it's mixed with work-based learning, it's like a degree done right. And I have that strange situation where I teach on undergrad programs, normal degrees, as well as apprenticeship programs. So there's always there is a disconnect. Often, maybe many students in their degree are kind of there maybe because they don't know what else to do, which is a real shame. But the apprenticeship opportunities, those that get into an apprenticeship and they're in a job, the benefits there. They come out of the degree apprenticeship with a degree, fine. They have no debt, and they have 3 or 4 years worth of work experience. How can you cannot argue against that, right? So we just need more companies creating more of these opportunities, making use of the leverage.
And I do think look, we should take the lead from you guys who work in technology, because you've always done that. You are problem solvers, and you will look wherever it takes to get to solve the problem. Now, what we have within apprenticeships are just huge amounts of information, data, knowledge, skills, and behaviors that will help you to solve the problems that you face in your day-to-day work. I would always, look, I'm a big fan of technology. I would always follow the lead of technologists and how they are building what happens in the workplace. Absolutely critical, I think.
Yeah, but I think we're still seeing, we try and bed in some face-to-face on occasion where it's worthwhile, where we can do a group problem solving and work on assignments together, less often, and that's where the real value comes in. But it has been interesting, that shift, a complete shift. So yeah, but it's an interesting time we live in. But on the topic of like the benefits of apprenticeships, any success stories that have stuck with you from your experience, just working with learners, working with those that are leading on programs? Any success, uplifting success stories?
Far too many. I mean, look, I've published over 2,000 books in my career. I've published technology that got to over 1.5 million people in all around the world. I've never done anything like this where we have fundamentally changed people's lives. This and we're focusing on people. Yeah. We're based in Stratford in East London. Okay, so that is the community we serve first, the employers there and the learners and the employees there. But we've then reached out around the country. Look, key things, 70% of our learners are women. Okay, now if you look at what's happening in schools, okay, 70% of the staff in those schools are women, but only 40% of the leaders are women. We've got a massive disparity between, and if you look at the gender pay gap, that's kind of shocking as well. So we've worked very, very closely with an organisation called Women Ed, organisation run by Vivian Porritt, who's recently got an MBE, who are just simply focused on getting more women into leadership positions in schools. So we have a cohort every year. I think the largest number we've had is about 100 on that cohort. Of that cohort, 35% of those people have got a promotion while doing the program. Okay, so we are actively getting women leaders into leadership positions in schools. But also the sort of the softer side of that is actually giving them a language with which to engage with generally male leadership teams, so that they don't feel that they're obscure, kept out of that sort of world. So there's that. There's giving them huge amounts of data around gender pay gap, so that they can push their senior leaders in their trusts or schools to change the things there. So Women Ed would always be really important for us. The fact is, after our first monitoring visit back in 2019, we were told by Ofsted to reach into those sort of, I suppose, those communities that they would see as in need of levelling up or needing to sort of move the dial in terms of social mobility. So 17% BAME learners on our programme, 13% with some sort of registered disability. So it's about looking at that. But fundamentally, we represent the employers we work with. We represent the communities that we serve and the schools in those communities. And it's worth bearing in mind that often the schools in those communities will be the largest employers in many of those communities. Schools are absolutely incredible places. And I think the pandemic showed that that's the community hub. There's no pubs anymore because all the pubs have been turned into whatever banks or coffee shops. So there's no community there. But communities, schools have got communities, and they're holding a lot of these communities together.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Yeah, I suppose schools are the hubs for future community as well, for the kids and
food banks,
and everything that goes on from
held
that.
in schools. Advice about where to go and get your jabs during the pandemic. Grievance or grief counselling for people that had lost like grandparents or kids. They actually held those. Remember, no school closed during the pandemic. Schools did not close during the pandemic. Just were open all the time. Key worker kids, and then delivering stuff through mediums like this. So.
Yeah, it's fascinating. And the point you mentioned about focusing on, I guess there's different terms for it. Probably not widening participation, but it being inclusive of ones from more underprivileged backgrounds, for example, like BAME, for example, and focusing on the gender imbalance as well. How, as a provider yourself, you're a provider,
Yep.
but you're working with the employers, which is like the school. How do you have an impact on that? Are you helping with kind of reaching out and finding these people, or these people that are already employed by the schools that you're upskilling?
Yeah.
Is that a tricky kind of
It
thing
is a
to
tricky
impact?
thing so far to impact. So almost exclusively our learners are coming from the schools, their existing staff in schools, be they working as teachers or working in, you could call it the back office operations, so finance, IT, HR. So we're upskilling across those existing staff. Like I said, we're going to launch next September our first pilot cohort of 250 school leavers working on degree apprenticeships in schools. 50% of them will be working on the new youth worker apprenticeship, so working with groups of young people in primary, so upper primary and also secondary schools, to help to offer that additional service, whether that be about parental engagement, attendance, reading, etc., or music, or maybe computer clubs, those sorts of things, running those sorts of things. And then the other 50% working as chartered managers, effectively working to support schools as they sort of need to scale up or develop the services that they offer. And in that instance, we'll be helping schools to find the right people, whether that be an existing staff member who's been there for years and has never been to university, or more likely some of those year 12 now, next year, year 13s, who maybe university is not right for them. Maybe they're not the right character. Maybe they've got challenges going on at home. Maybe they're a carer and they need to be staying at home. Or maybe they simply don't want to take on 60 grand's worth of debt. Or they culturally, it's not appropriate for them to do that. So it's about providing those opportunities. And again, coming back to the fact that schools, massive employers, really important employers. And I can imagine if I had a young person work in schools for 3 years, get a degree while working in school, engaging with the community in that way, what an incredible start to somebody's sort of early adulthood. Absolutely phenomenal. So we're very, very excited about that going forward.
Yeah, no, that is exciting, and they're living and breathing it for 3-4 years. Absolutely. while they're studying. That gives them such a head start, right? Rather than trying to recruit graduates into a role which potentially they don't really understand. And I suppose in school education as well, there is a teachers shortage, as far as I know. Is that accurate?
It's pretty.
Is there ever not? But I think it's been tough times, particularly
and it's
over the last
only
couple of years
going one
as well,
way in that direction. Look, we have an imbalance in the population. We have lots of old people. We don't have so many young people coming through, so we don't have so many people come. So it's systemic. It's not something that is particularly challenging in schools because somehow the press sometimes talk about teachers, how people are. You're not getting paid quite as well as if you're going off into banking or whatever. So there's those challenges, but there's also just an age gap, an age challenge. We've got lower birth rates over the last 20 years ago now, and that's coming through. So a lot of challenges around that. The point is that schools sit on that talent pipeline. Schools have 650,000 18-year-olds every year that leave, and actually retaining a couple of hundred of them to support those schools to take the next step in their journey is a great opportunity. I also think that schools could probably do more to generally promote apprenticeships. Again, I think there's a lot of this about changing the status of apprenticeships, and I think that's incumbent on us as providers to really help do that too.
Yeah, that's true. I was talking to a lady recently who was a careers advisor, and one important string to her bow, as it were, is talking about degree apprenticeships. And there's a lot of education there, both with parents and schools and students at schools, like we spoke about earlier, kind of demystifying what they actually are and explaining the potential, the incredible benefits.
Absolutely.
It's like a win-win-win.
And how exciting
and
that can be. And actually, I think part of it is about helping the providers to really try and give I'm not saying a university experience, give a different experience. What is it like to start in a job? What do you do on a Friday night at the end of term? What do you do when you first start your program? And I think we're looking at how we, as well as curating the learning, is curating that experience over the 3 years, so that they are having some of those, knocking some of the edges off you that you often need knocking off when you're 18 to 21, though that's a long time ago. I can't really remember that.
Yeah. Indeed. And it is a completely unique experience, degree apprenticeships. It's not, I mean, what is the degree experience these days anyway? That's something that I think is sort of changing in any way, and questioning the worth of what the things that differentiated the university experience over COVID.
A lot of Zoom calls,
which weren't there anymore. It's kind of, yeah, that's it. But the degree apprenticeship experience, it's something else, right? And you get that camaraderie from your fellow cohort who are in the trenches, not kind of in the bar.
Again, our CEO, Dave Cobb, talks really passionately about this. His stepson didn't want to go to university, and when he said he didn't, he had real challenges in school. He wasn't going to be on one of their statistics, so they dropped him a little bit. So it's about helping the schools to recognise actually these are going to have really worthwhile jobs, and actually that 3-year experience is going to be quite unique and incredible.
Yeah, exactly. Final point I'd like to have a little chat around is any best practices you've kind of developed or picked up over the years that you potentially be sort of happy to share in the kind of learner experience or design of the program. I know you mentioned a couple earlier, but
I mean, look,
lay
key
some
thing
ideas
here,
on
and
that.
this is not my idea. This is our Chief Learning Officer Nick's idea. Every learner comes into a pod. So we have 2,000 learners on our program. You can get lost in there as an individual. So we break that down into pods of 300. We have 6 people looking after those people with a pod leader. So you've got 7 people and a quality assurance person who are responsible for these smaller colleges. And that for us has allowed us to scale up without losing any of the quality of the delivery. So that would be one thing, is that sort of pod system, and giving people, almost putting people, I mean, to use a university metaphor, into sort of colleges rather than just the university. So, and obviously, I mean, it's brilliant. The pods, they give themselves, dynamic names and things like that. But there is a real identity for the people within each of those pods. So that's critical. And that's often geographic as well. So that's one element of it. I think the other element of it is involving as many people as possible in the early development of programs. And for us, that means learners, employers, it means our staff who are doing the delivery. It also means our university partners. And in some instances, employers who we have yet to engage with. So on these degree apprenticeships, I've just been around 70 different leaders of schools and trusts saying, what is it you want young people who are starting out in working in your school to be able to do? Now, I've got a very long list, and we're whittling away at that, but it's very much about these a lot of these people we've never worked with before. We're actually engaging with them to find out what it is that they need as an employer. But it's making sure that you have that rounded thing, so you're looking at the employer all the way through to the learner, and also the people delivering the program as well, because that can be quite challenging in its own right. So those are the sort of the 2 things we're focusing on. But also, just coming back to the third thing, is for us, live events, bringing people together to have a face-to-face experience at least once a year is absolutely essential. In previous years, we've run conferences of up to sort of 500-600 people, not on apprenticeships. And there's something about those conversations you might have while you're having coffee or while you're having lunch or whatever, that's where you solidify a lot of the content, a lot of the knowledge that's going on is just through that conversation. So that personal interactions, absolutely. Well, it's also, I mean, I'll be honest with you, it's also something we really enjoy ourselves. We much prefer to do it from, our own personal point of view. So it kind of works in all ways, really.
Yeah. Well, look, we need human interaction occasionally, however introverted we may be. And we get a lot of that over in the tech and digital world.
It's a very good point. And what we find is that actually, even those people who are, and you wouldn't think of teachers being introverted, but we've got a number who very much are. Actually, you find that they just find a little bit of just that viewing, that watching, that observing, but then also forming their own, groups as well is really, really important too. So.
Nice. Yeah, I really like the pods.
I mean, look,
kind of concept.
Nick absolutely has thought about this very deeply over the last 4 years, and I think ex-teacher, so really understands that the challenges of those individuals that they're going through. So yeah, so it's smart guy.
Yeah, and does pulling in all those stakeholders like from the start when it comes to program design. I mean, this is something it's related to me in my day job, as it were, as program lead on a digital program. I will be kind of revalidating one program and potentially redesigning another program. And yeah, it's trying to pull in the potential learners and the employers, and not just making it a token consultancy kind of checkbox exercise, right? Which can often be, a lot of things in the university land can be a little bit like that. Due to different pressures or whatever, it's just the way the world is. But it's making it meaningful, and the delivery stuff as well. I think it's interesting because you're working at scale, which is fantastic, and like the pods are a great way of scaling the community. And the one thing that often seems to happen anecdotally from, I talk to learners who maybe going with different providers. A different standards. Some of the big providers, right? Often they have the curriculum design happens at the start, and then they get coaches to deliver that curriculum. But you can design an incredible curriculum, but then often learners will come out of these larger kind of providers frustrated, maybe because the kind of coaching or the support, the week to week, month to month support just wasn't as good as maybe it should have been, and it's maybe because of that disconnect, right? Because the coaches maybe don't have the skin in the game, as it were, with how it's delivered, and it's kind of been all the kind of the goodness has been systemized out of it, right? that's the risk of scale.
That's a very, very good point, actually. It's one of the reasons we hire a lot from schools. So we hire a lot of people that work in schools currently to make sure, and there will always be probably about 40% of the mentors and the pod leader within every pod will have come from a school background. And it's about interfacing that world of schools with the world of apprenticeships. So we're trying to do that all the time. And then it's just making sure, a lot of it is about making sure that those meetings happen regularly. And if you maintain that regularity of your mentor meeting or whatever, it's then about allowing yourself to move slightly beyond what we're delivering in terms of the apprenticeship and to be very focused on the learner. We are, at the end of the day, once those learners start program, that is our entire focus, is on what they need. So, for example, during the pandemic, a lot of people just needed to talk, just needed to share the experiences that they were having, whether they be personal or professional. And so it's actually given our mentors a little bit more license. They do then chase you up for a lot of work, which is kind of their job as well. But it's about allowing those conversations to happen in a space that is quite flexible, and I think very focused on the individual as well. But it's not easy. Without a doubt, it's probably the most challenging thing we have, is to maintain the quality of those conversations that are happening, those formal progress reviews, more than anything else.
Yeah, you've got to have that formal process, right? But we all know that humans are very messy beings, and communication is messy, and life is messy, and we need to be able to support these apprentices going through lots of different life situations. I've seen that even on small cohorts. There's always stuff going on, and it's tough. But that's what makes the difference. Them feeling supported, that's what gets them through.
I think that's something you get with apprenticeships that you don't get through university. Two of my children have now been through university. It's my daughter's graduation actually on Thursday. But I think their well, no, it's
congrats.
But I think their experience of university was not about that support, not about a lot of those conversations. And at the end of the day, universities have scaled massively, 20, 30, 40,000. But there's something about having that mentor, something about having that coach who is there for you, that I think is just unique about apprenticeships and absolutely essential. So.